All right. So, Sage, you've been playing Black Myth Wukong. The game is finally out. It is finally here. What are your initial impressions of it?
And this so far has totally lived up to the hype that I had for it. I've got about 12 hours into the game. Somewhere in chapter three, as I understand it, there are six total chapters. So, but they've also gotten significantly bigger. This the third chapter is just massive. Like I feel like I've completed both the first two and the time it's taken me to just get like part of the way through chapter three. Um, but yeah, right off the bat, this game has one of the coolest, just most visually stunning kind of intro sequences I've seen in a video game, frankly, since God of War 3 in 2010.
Mm,
In terms of that epic scale of mythology, this kind of picks up as at the ending of the story of Journey to the West, where Sun Wukong has gone into heaven to like go to war with all of the gods and the celestial beings. And that's your tutorial is literally a fight on the clouds, and there's all these giants surrounding you, and it's so like it's just the perfect hook. You go into an epic mythology game, or that you're hoping will be an epic mythology game, and right off the bat, it gives me everything I'm looking for from something like this. Now, there's been a lot of discussion on this in general, but a lot of people have, it's like, is this more of a Dark Souls game? That's kind of the vibe people got from a lot of the footage over the years. Uh, the team, I believe, said early on that Dark Souls and God of War were big inspirations for this. But if I was going to compare this to another video game, and I think it does a really good job of being unique. There's elements that I recognize, like your kind of rest stops that are very similar to Dark Souls. You rest at them, refill all your health and your magic. All the enemies that you beat come back, right? So that's very Dark Souls. But if I was going to compare it most closely to another game, it would actually be Bayonetta.
mm,
The kind of quick rapid feel to the combat. It's so fast and smooth. It's much more about dodging. It's not like there's like a parry special spell kind of ability, but for the most part, with your basic gameplay elements, it's not really like too much of a block or parrying involved in the game. And even when you do get like that kind of spell parry off, you're not really rewarded too much for it, like you are in something like Sekiro. But it's much more of a dodge game here, where like at Bayonetta, if you do like a perfect dodge, it like slows down time and kind of freezes things and gives you this chance to get a bunch of hits. And this game has a mechanic very similar to that. But the actual hits, the combos that you're doing, it just feels very satisfying. And some of that's the sound design. It just feels very, very impactful. Um, there's also so many boss fights in this, like rapid, like nearly back to back. Some of them. It's not quite like a boss rush game. I guess in that sense is where I'd compare it to something like Sekiro, where like you have areas in between and you have kind of regular enemies, but a lot of this game is focused on these just really cool, very well designed boss fights. That all have these very specialized patterns. It's all about kind of learning how to maneuver yourself through that environment. It's got that kind of almost boss fights are a puzzle sort of element that is kind of Souls like. Um, Now, as far as the difficulty goes, I'll be really curious to see, how hard people find this in general. So far, there's been like three bosses or so that have given me like a really hard time where I've like had to sit and really kind of focus in on it. But the vast majority of the bosses, I've probably done like 15, 20 boss fights at this point. And I think most of them I found fairly easy, or maybe like on the second try I'll get it. I haven't found it to be like a supremely difficult game. I've also played all of the Souls franchise, all the From Software stuff. So that might just some of that reflex, some of that kind of built-in muscle memory. That might be giving me an edge here. So maybe I'm not the best judge of difficulty for it. But there are no difficulty settings. Like it's just you turn the game up. It's just kind of the way it is. Um, and then, well, the one other big thing I definitely wanted to bring up is I have heard other people talking about having some performance issues with the game, some slowdown, some frame rate issues. I personally have not experienced any of that. I'm like 12 hours in,
Are
and it
people
has
saying
been
this on it's on PC or PS5 console or
so it's about the PC that I've heard of that about, but
oh,
that's also pre a day one patch coming out, so perhaps that solves some of those problems. But for me, at least playing it on the PlayStation 5, I've it's been a completely smooth experience. I have really not had a single glitch or kind of frame rate or screen tearing or any of that stuff. It's been like buttery smooth, which is one of the things you kind of worry about with a game that like looks so graphically high quality, and it's such a big experience. Almost everything nowadays comes out with like some degree of glitches. Like it's like Capcom with Resident Evil is like the only thing I could think of where I'm like those come out and they're smooth and I don't have to worry about it. So this for me is even like ahead of the market on the performance element of it because it's just been just kind of no issues at all. Like some people before it came out, I saw we're talking about like some crashing and some like bad frame rate problems, but again, that's PC version. Maybe that's still there. Maybe that's been patched. But on the PS5, that's been like it runs like a dream.
okay. And does it you mentioned a game like God of War 3, and when that game came out, very much pushed the limits of the console that it was on. And when God of War Ragnarok, people were like, "Okay, this really is like this is what you need a PS5 for. This game right here, because what it does for this console really pushes it to a limit, shows off the glory of that game." Is the same case here with Black Myth Wukong? This is like one of the reasons to have a PS5 or a console or things like that in general.
I think so. I think this game is gorgeous. I think it's right up there with something like God of War Ragnarok graphically. And it's something to be said for you don't get Chinese mythology in video game. Like this is kind of a first, at least on like a AAA level like this, and at least internationally. So not only I think is it just in terms of its the graphical fidelity, it is extremely high quality. It is right at the top of the industry for that. And then it's also got this just really wonderful, unique art direction and aesthetic and kind of just visual design, even aside from the graphics themselves, that just it's so unfamiliar within at least the medium of video games that it sets it apart for so many of these enemies are things that I've never seen before. I'm no expert on Chinese myths, so some of this stuff is going to be out there, and I'm sure for some people, especially if you are from China, it's not necessarily going to be new, but I definitely have not seen it depicted like on the kind of level that this has picked it up. I mean, the this is the kind of tutorial sequence here you're playing footage of, and especially when it kind of ends the gameplay part and goes into the cutscene here, it is visually just incredible what they're able to achieve here. And
Seamless?
for so many, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I said seamless? It's seamless?
It feels
Cool.
super seamless to me. There are some loading screens in the game between areas, but they're like 10 seconds. It's super quick. So it doesn't have like the completely unbroken, no loading screens element of, stuff like the Dead Space remake or some of those games. But those are also smaller games, right? In terms of the area that you can actually explore. It's a little more compact, and so it allows that kind of thing. But outside of like 10-second loading screen every once in a while, they're not even common. And when you die, your respawn is also very, very quick as well. It goes super fast. So yeah, I really have had no issues with it. I can't think of okay, the one complaint that I could maybe throw its way, there are times when and I'm trying to explore and I'm trying to go, all right, which way is the main path? Let me go every other way and explore and find everything I can before I go do like the next story-based boss mission, right? Let me fight the side stuff, let me explore. And sometimes like it does get a little hard to tell what's a side path and what's a main path. Luckily, I mean, you can fast travel backwards, so it's not a huge deal. Um, but there are times when I'm like, oh, I wish that maybe the environment just made it a little more obvious which way I was supposed to go. Just because I like going the other way and making sure I'm finding everything. And sometimes you get sucked into a cutscene or like a big story moment, and you're like, oh, I was definitely not done exploring this area first, but you should come back later.
Yeah. People have talked about sometimes people don't like big games. As far as games like Zelda Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, how massive it is in terms of the scope of it. Would you say Black Myth Wukong is a little bit better in that sense of it's not as massive as something like that, but it's also not as straightforward as something like maybe people are hoping for. Like, okay, it's clear you have to go to this objective and do this. For players who do like that type of experience, the A to B just type of experience, does it satisfy that player there too, as well as satisfying a player that also likes kind of that more bigger open world experience?
I think it's definitely closer to the former. It's not massive. Like the areas are big, don't get me wrong, and there are paths to go on, and there is side content, but it is relatively straightforward. I would say in terms of that element of it, I would compare it actually to something like God of War Ragnarok, where there's certainly stuff to explore and there is side content. You're not funneled down a single hallway the whole time, but there is a pretty straightforward, and despite having like optional kind of explorable side areas, it is not like it's not something where like it's not like a Fallout game or a Skyrim or anything like that where you're just going to get sidetracked on a list of never-ending side quests for 30 hours before you get back to the main story. I think that it's definitely uh more linear than that. I think it compares to any single player game where you've got your main story, you've got your path you're following, and then there's every once in a while, hey, there's some stuff to go check out before you go the way you're supposed to go. It's to me it seems pretty straightforward. I would say that if you're looking for something that's super open world, uh, you know, it might actually be less of a thing to be interested in then. I think it's closer to the linear story driven levels than it is open world. It's got that in between element, but I think it's closer to linear.
Yeah, and I don't know if you said it already, but you said before when we talked, you clocked in 12 hours, of the game. Overall, the experience may vary for some people depending on how difficult they find it. I've seen various reports here. Some people say about 40, 50 hours here if you want just to do the main quest, and then if you include all the other side quest stuff, it may take you to 55 to 70 hours there. I've seen some people say that with it. What do you think as far as like your experience with it playing a little 12 hours, you think it's a game that you're going to try to 100% and then really go that full experience, or do you think you're just going to hit the main quest or come back
I
later?
think I think I am going to try and do everything. Um,
Okay.
it's it's got the kind of thing where, and it doesn't happen. I mean, for me, it's probably 2 or 3 times a year I get this experience with the game. But it's that sort of kind of addictive feeling where you get through a part, you get that satisfying victory over a boss, and you have somewhat of a good idea of like it's probably only going to be 10 minutes before I find another boss. Let me just do let me just do one more. Let me just do one more after that. No, well, I did that, so let me just do one more. It's got that it's got that kind of gravitational pull for me that yeah, maybe a couple times a year I find a game that really has that. But like where it's like I have to convince myself to put it down and go do something important. Like I have to like argue with my. It's like no, I should really go do this instead. Let me set this down and come back later because I don't want to. Like every time I'm in the middle of this, I don't want to put the controller down, and I mean I think that's a really big sign of success for me.
Very nice. Any strong negatives for you with the game so far?
Like I said, really the only thing is just maybe a little bit of signposting to say like this is where you're supposed to go, so that I could turn around and explore before I kind of continue the main story. Um, there are some invisible walls in the environment sometimes, where like it'll look like you could totally go down a path and then you'll try and it's just kind of an invisible wall. It's not too immersion breaking for me, but I could totally see that bothering some people where maybe the environment looks slightly more explorable than it actually is. Um, but again, for me, that's not a huge ding. I just could see why maybe someone else would get a little frustrated trying to go down these paths and then kind of getting stuck on the environment. Um, but other than that, really not no real strong negatives.
Mm, okay. We're gonna come back a little bit later. You're gonna give your full review of it once you're done beating the game there. This is just with your initial impressions of Black with Wukong, how you felt about it. Like I said, big success for it right here. This is Forbes article right here, Forbes India. It says right here that Black Myth Wukong was released globally on Tuesday and enjoyed one of the best opening days as measured by the number of players on a gaming platform, Steam, and sold nearly 1.2 million pre-release copies there. And this game says is already being hailed as one of the most successful Chinese-made video games already. This is here. And then it says here more than 1.4 million people are playing Black Myth via gaming platform Steam around at around 5 p.m. There on this
And it's
past,
gone up since then.
and it's gone up there.
It's yeah,
Okay.
it's right now, as far as I'm aware, its highest concurrent number of players is 2.3 million, which it actually hit like 2.1 million yesterday, and already at that point was considered the highest peak player count on Steam. And then it kind of dropped down because not everybody's playing all day. And then today it went back up and broke its own record. So it broke the record 2 times within 2 days of release.
Wow. And it's also getting high praise from critics as well. On Metacritic, it has a score of 82 out of 100, based on an average of 57 reviews there. So it's getting some high scores there. So it seems like a big win, especially for the Chinese market there. Like I said, I mean, what was the last big Chinese video game here that got this much attention? Probably hard to
There has
name.
never been one.
So yeah, I mean, hey, it's getting a lot of praise there and financial success. But as much as we talked about a lot of some of the positive stuff, there's also a lot of negative that's kind of going on right now. A lot of negativity, I think, also kind of sparked from this review right here. So this was Screen Rant. Screen Rant reviews a lot of games, reviews a lot of pop culture stuff there, media, and they gave it 3 out of 5 stars. That's what they kind of gave it, which is average. 3 out of 5. That's probably saying
Yeah, I
something
mean
like
that's not even like a horrible number either. That it's yeah, average is a good way to describe it. That's not like it's not like this person hated it.
yeah, just kind of average. Pros: combat is fluid and fun. The author of this article wrote, cinematography can be breathtaking at times. Great diversity in items and mechanics. Cons: game performance is unpolished. Gameplay becomes repetitive over time. But this was the one thing that got people really angry. One of the cons is lacking in inclusivity and diversity. Was one of the big cons that they've marked off here for the game. Um, yeah, that's what kind of got people up in arms about that. And you can't see who actually wrote this article anymore because one of the notes here says that editors note the author's name has been removed for their safety. Yeah, and then also another note with this article here, it says the studio behind Black Myth Wukong Game Science has previously been accused of fostering a toxic environment for its workers. The 2023 allegations include sexualized comments against women, misogyny, fat phobia, and more. More details can be found here. Then the links to another article there. So yes, the writer of this article, has been facing a lot of harassment because of the review that I think it was a woman who wrote it. I think it was a woman who wrote this review here. And like they said, she had to remove their name for safety. What do you think about those cons that the reviewer left for this game?
I mean, the performance thing, again, that's someone that played the PC version before it came out. So that's something that like that could be totally valid. They could have had a ton of performance issues. It's hard for me to really comment on that one too much because that's especially with PCs, they're also different. It's somewhat more of an individualized experience. As far as the diversity part, I don't know, it's a game with like no humans really, barely at all to speak of. It's all like animals and stuff, like animal spirits. So I don't know 100% what someone's asking for. when they make that complaint about the game. So I mean, I saw it and I rolled my eyes at it a little bit, but I also am like, I'm not gonna go harass someone for feeling that way. It's like it is just their opinion. I mean, do I agree with it? I don't know if I really see it, but at the same time, if that's someone's opinion, they're entitled to have their opinion, whether I agree with it or not. So, I mean, I just said earlier, right? With like Prometheus, we were talking about, don't harass the people online. Like they can disagree with you, and this is one review out of how many glowing positive reviews that this game's gotten. So what if one website gave it a low score? I like, I'm for me, it's just like I go like, that's a little weird, and then I move on with my day. It takes up no space in my mind, really.
Yeah. Yeah, because yeah, when one of the cons is inclusivity, diversity. Like I said, they're mostly everybody's mostly animals, right? They're mostly
Yeah,
demons or creatures, something like that here in it.
creatures, animals. I mean, some of them are more humanoid than others, but for them, a good chunk of them are like so animal that like you wouldn't be able to tell whether they were male or female anyway. And yeah, I mean, and there's even been a few very feminine like characters in like boss fights that I've come across. So it's not like it's not there at all. Maybe that's a sign of skipping side content. Maybe they're not seeing some of that stuff because they're not playing all the side content and exploring. I don't know if that's why, but I don't know. It seems like a little bit of an odd complaint. But again, if that's how the person feels, it's how they feel. I'm not going to get mad at them for it, you know.
Yeah. It's a little silly considering the type of game that it is here. And it seems like the humanoid characters that you do see, are they just Chinese there, or
Yeah,
they look?
everything's Chinese. Every like
Yeah.
it's. I mean, if it's talking about racial diversity, I don't know why there would be any because it's an ancient Chinese story from like the 1600s. I would think it would be exclusively representing Chinese culture. If it's about like a gender thing, then again, I think so much of it's like animals that don't aren't distinctly male or female, at least from what I can tell. I mean, some of them are maybe more masculine looking, that are slightly more human. But I've also, like I said, I've also come across some very feminine characters, enemy types, and boss fights and stuff as well. So like, I'm there's no lack of it that I'm noticing. And if it's racial diversity, again, it's like ancient Chinese mythology. So like, I don't know why there'd be anything but Chinese characters in it.
So here she goes on to the author goes on to elaborate on this. It says large lacks inclusion and representation. So she says, while my analysis and review of Black Myth Wukong remain focused on gameplay, it's important to mention the controversy surrounding the game's studio and the reports of misogyny and sexism from developers. Something we read earlier on in the notes here. Playing as a female gamer allowed me to notice issues surrounding inclusion and representation. As far as chapter 1 and 2, while the characters are clearly fictitious and fantastical creatures, there were no female or feminine NPCs, enemies, or bosses present. The only
Well, that's just
exception,
straight up not true. I've
uh,
seen
the
multiple with my own eyes. So
The only exception, if you can call it female, is a boss named Mother of Stones in Chapter 2, which is nothing more than a still glowing rock with no abilities being guarded by other enemies. The lack of diversity and inclusivity resonates with the misogynistic comments reported to have been made by developers which express disdain for women playing their games. Although Black Myth Wukong does have truly enjoyable moments, the underlying feeling that women aren't welcome in the world felt present throughout my gameplay experience. Um,
well, I can tell you right now that that's part of that's just straight up not true. I've seen characters in the game. All I just One of the last things I did before I shut the game off a little bit ago was a boss fight with this woman that like transforms into a dragon and then back into a woman, and is this like celestial kind of she's like a member of like the court of heaven in the game's mythology, and it's just like, yeah, it has all these like crazy lightning powers, and it was actually one of the tougher bosses I've dealt with so far in the game overall. So I mean, like that's just one example. It's not the only one I've noticed. Um, and that, yep, that's the dragon that she turns into. So I think this boss fight is just the dragon or from this particular sequence. And then there's a part later in the game where you're fighting like the woman form of the same character, but like on top of like this giant turtle in the water. It's the same character though. That is the that dragon becomes this woman. But then I also do want to call attention to so in that review there, she's mentioning like a previous controversy about sexist comments and stuff. And this is where this is another moment where I'm glad I'm friends with my friend Sky, who co-hosts on my channel. She's from China originally, and so that was an IGN article that posted a bunch of this stuff a couple months ago. And at first, I was just like, I don't know what to think exactly because they're like saying that these comments were made, but then there were people in China that were on the internet that were saying, "Oh, these are mistranslated. This isn't what they were really saying. IGN is just trying to contort this to make it sound bad." And for a while, I was like, "Well, I don't know who to believe because I can't read it, and I'm not seeing anybody post, what the comments were or how they were mistranslated." So for a while, I was just like, "I don't really know what to think." But then, not too long ago, maybe a month or so, my friend Sky, who's originally from China, she actually got to see those comments themselves, and she told me that they absolutely were mistranslated. There were, as far as she could tell, there were no sexist comments to speak of. And to put it in context, the actual quote translated properly was, "We do not want female representation that is only for the male gaze or for the lustful male gaze." So
Mm.
again, I could see how that could easily be misinterpreted. Translating different language is complicated. I just heard a story the other day about someone at a wedding, and this woman's grandfather got up to give a speech, and he's speaking Ukrainian, and in the English translation, well, in his actual language, he says like, "No one will ever love you as much as I do," blah blah blah. And then the English translation from the translator came out, "I'm your grandfather. No one will ever love you."
Mm.
So you can just see how
Oh,
language can be easily misinterpreted. And just knowing someone personally who was able to look at those things and kind of come back to me and say, "This is what that was actually said." So to me, that review, again, it's just someone's opinion. I'm not going to get angry at them. They should not be harassed off the internet for having written it. But it does seem to be based in misinformation, a mistranslation that, whether it was on accident or it was to get clicks for IGN, I don't know. I'm not going to presume to know if what that they're doing anything on purpose or not. But it's, to me, that seems like this big mistranslation that people heard, went into the game with a bias, already thinking that that's, oh, this is going to be sexist, and then just assumed because that's what they heard, all right, this is what I'm seeing. And I'd also like to point out too that the uh, the big final piece of evidence in that IGN article was that the game company's logo kind of looks like a sperm, and that was like their really strong evidence that this game is going to be sexist when it comes out. And if nothing else, that feels like it is truly grasping at straws, and that's the
uh,
sign of someone that doesn't have an argument to me.
what's the name of it? It's game science, right?
Game science. And I even looked into it, and the little logo, it's from like a projectile attack in like a mobile game that they worked on. So it's got like this little lightning bolt thing, and I believe it comes from the like Chinese character for tadpole is how they
Mm.
got that logo. But again, this was used as like evidence that the studio is, on top of mistranslated quotes, their logo looking kind of like a sperm was like the big nail in the coffin for why this game is going to be like a sexist nightmare. So again, I'm not angry at this person for having a different opinion than me. You should leave them alone. If you want to post a helpful comment and be like, "Hey, I think you might have misunderstood this," that's one thing. But like, don't harass them off the internet. But it does. I do think they got this one wrong. I don't think that they're working with all the correct information.
Yeah. So this is the logo right here. I guess I can kind of see that. I guess it looks.
I can see how it could look like that to someone else.
Yeah.
But to
I
be
don't know. It kind of
like,
looks like a spoon. I don't know. It kind of looks like a spoon to it.
sure, sure, sure. but to kind of assume like, hey, this company's sexist because their logo reminded me of a sperm, I'm like, that's a really thin argument, I think.
Yeah. And so this is a feminine presenting person right here. Huh,
Yeah.
I would say so.
Oh yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And especially the voice also was very feminine.
well, let's hear the voice. Let's hear a little bit of it.
You browsed Turtle General. How could you know he's here below?
Turtle? Steak?
Yeah.
Who cares?
Feminine voice there, I'd say. Very feminine voice.
And that's
Um,
just one example of a few, and I'm, not even halfway through the game. And so, to me, it just kind of looks like you're kind of ignoring things to make that argument as well.
yeah. So it seems like she's wrapping up the real life stuff there to combined with playing the game and not really separating the two there.
Yeah.
As a reviewer myself, when people, I know, when what was that? I think when the last Fantastic Beast movie came out, and there you did have critics come out and say that, well, I'm going to give it a negative review because I don't like J.K. Rowling, so I'm going to give it a negative review on purpose. I'm not even going to try to like it. Um, I mean, I feel like if you're gonna have that sentiment about it, which is, understandable if you have maybe some certain feelings towards a person, given maybe certain views that they have, that's fine. But I don't think you should review the thing that they're doing. Then, if you already know you're gonna be biased about it, I don't think you should be reviewing it. So if she already knew that, she's letting the outside kind of things she's hearing about this game studio kind of come into her mind and while playing the game, and you're kind of coming into it with a little bit of a bias there, but so I think that shouldn't have been allowed if that was the case. And yeah, the cons, I mean, these are good cons. I mean, game performance is unpolished, gameplays becomes repetitive over time. That's fine, I mean, if you feel that way. And there's also had some good positive things to say about it, like you said, combat is fluid, the cinematography, the way the game looks, the certain mechanics of the game, the combat of the game. That she praised that here. But also, this doesn't, one kind of mediocre review of it doesn't, like you said, shouldn't overshadow all the positivity that this game has gotten from all around. People were even mad that IGN, speaking about IGN, gave it an 8. IGN gave it an 8 out of
Which is a great. It says on their scale that means it was great.
Yeah. And they mentioned, and then somebody tried to contrast, like, well, in IGN China, they gave it a 10 out of 10, and then IGN, gave it a. So what does that tell you? You know what I mean?
It's
Um,
almost like these reviews are written by individual people with different opinions.
yeah. Exactly. I mean, some people are not going to feel all the same way about the game. So yeah, you did have the IGN, which is based here in America, the states. Person gave it an 8. IGN China gave it a 10. IGN Brazil, they gave it also an 8. So, what does that tell you? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Absolutely fucking nothing. The person that just reviewed it.
Get a
um,
tinfoil hat to just for this.
yeah. So that's something that people are going to be talking about just with the review. That, hey, every people who don't like this game or people who don't give it a 10 out of 10, they must have some agenda against the game. The game is now wrapped up in the big culture war stuff there. And then also with this kind of news that also came about, and you looked a little bit further into this. So it says Black Myth Wukong, no feminist propaganda, no COVID-19 discussions. Email is real. And this is also Forbes again. It says a reported document regarding coverage for the upcoming Black Myth Wukong has been floating around the internet, making some very strange demands from creators in order to receive a code. It seemed almost too absurd to be true, but now I've been able to confirm with a US based creator. I trust that it is in fact legitimate. A Google document attached to the email said the following about coverage: dues, enjoy the game. Well, that's a simple one. Enjoy the game. Uh,
That's
uh,
easy.
don't insult other influencers or players. That seems kind of maybe reasonable there. Do not use any offensive language slash humor. Do not include politics, violence, nudity, feminist propaganda, fetishization, and other content that instigates negative discourse. Do not use trigger words such as quarantine or isolation or COVID-19. Do not discuss content related to China's game industry policies, opinions, news, etc., etc. This email was not sent to journalists, as some of them have said it's fake based on that. But it was for creators only. These guidelines may also have made it to all creators. or were sent out merely from requests for codes from those creators. There is no NDA required to accept the code. Um, yeah. So you looked a little bit into this. So it was mainly coming from the Chinese government, not necessarily the game developers there that were kind of offering this request.
Yeah, well, I mean, it comes, I think, from the government through the developer because, again, it's just a fact about doing business in China that, like, if you kind of aren't allowed to have a business without the government being involved to some degree, right? So there's kind of an immediate list of demands, just to establish a business, and these are definitely things that comes across as government propaganda, right? Like, don't talk about any of these things. We don't like this. Especially, don't talk about policies about how the government is involved with the studio. So some of that is the nature of, I think, doing business in China. But then I think the two big points. One, I looked into exactly like, well, if some journalists weren't getting this email, but then other people were, what is the difference? Why is there that difference? And to my understanding, this was not sent with review codes. This was sent with codes that were specifically for people creating like tutorial videos or like tip guides, how to sort of stuff. And, you know, I'm not going to say it's not silly at all, even for that, but I think it's at least slightly more understandable for like, hey, we're giving you this so that you can create a tutorial and show people how to play the game if they get stuck on something. You don't really need to be talking about anything other than how the game works if that's the specific intention of the video you're creating. Um, if now it sounds like review codes did not come with this, which means they weren't asking or putting restrictions on for a review of the game, which in theory could be a larger conversation, which you could bring some other stuff up if you really want to. But again, I mean, I'm still going to say it's a bit of a silly list of demands, and I think it's something that, sadly, when I saw it, I was like, yeah, it kind of seems like the CCP to me. It wasn't really something I was too surprised by. The other thing, though, is, if that is the price of doing business with a Chinese company, don't take the free game.
Mm,
Like if that is too much of a demand, and you're like, hey, I'm not comfortable with you asking these things with me, don't take the free game.
mm,
You could buy it or not play it, or if you really feel like you are like, no, 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 I gotta make content about this, like I really gotta do that, I was really looking forward to that. Well, maybe this is one game that you buy yourself, and then you don't get a list of anything by purchasing it on your own. I don't know. I think there's quite a few ways around that conversation, or that necessarily being a big deal. But I also think that I think a lot of people just maybe don't understand how business and the government's involvement in business works in China. And I'm no expert. I don't know a lot about it, but I know enough to know that this is not some kind of out there uniquely weird thing either.
yeah. Do you think it's hypocritical for people that complain about Stellar Blade, saying that they're censoring titties,
Yes.
and then to also not have an issue with this? You think? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh,
Oh, absolutely. If you were mad about the censored camel toe costume, and then you're like, no, but this is fine. Yeah, if you were upset about that, then you should just have just you believe in whatever you believe in, but apply it to everything. Don't pick and choose. Otherwise, I know you have no principles.
yeah. And my position on censorship, I mean, some censorship is depends, it's a case by case basis, right? I mean, obviously, I
Yeah,
mean, most things people can agree with is like, people understand why there's rating systems for movies, right? Why is
totally.
something PG-13? Why is something NC-17? Why is something R-rated? That's, you know, censored, you know what I mean? So you get that rating system because you don't want certain audiences to come into the theater to see a certain movie because of certain themes and things that are going to be there. So I think most people can agree on that, but I don't think people just think that censorship is just only things I don't like,
Right.
is censorship, and then the things I like is not censorship.
Yeah.
So there. So I mean, people, I mean, have a very loose definition of that, of understanding of that. It seems like. But yeah, but hey, but don't let this overshadow. Hey, go out there, enjoy the game. Don't let the whole culture war get you down there. Who's this a win for, the left or the right, or you know what I mean? Who's taking this game and claiming it as theirs? Good
They'll be
game.
fighting about something else in a week anyway.
Yeah, I mean, hey, Assassin's Creed Shadows coming out in a few months, so you're gonna forget all about Black Myth Wukong Controversy, and the new shift is gonna be Assassin's Creed Shadow and how that game's gonna do, and if that game's gonna sell well, all that stuff like that. So you got, you ever see that meme of like the person with the chip inside the head and you click it and you open it up and take it out and it clicks like that's kind of gonna be like how it is. The game,
Yep.
Black Myth Wukong, take it out, take out that chip, put in Assassin's Creed Shadows, close it. That's gonna be what it kind of happens there. But yeah, getting universal praise out right now. I guess maybe you would say probably get it on consoles. Not really PCs there if people
I
have.
mean, I've had no issues. I think I've yet to hear whether or not, because pretty much all games do universally have day one patches. So all of the reviews that mention technical or performance issues are from before the launch day. So also before the day one patch would have come out. So it's entirely possible that on launch day, that day one patch came out and fixed all those technical performance problems. It's also possible that they're still persistent in the PC version. It's also possible that in the console version I'm playing, they will pop up further on into the game as I get further and further in. So that happens sometimes, where like the first couple sections are super smooth, and then maybe as it goes along, some of those issues start to show itself. It's possible that's going to happen. I just can say right now, I have not had any of those issues at like the 12-hour mark.
Yeah. So this review for Screen Rant, they said that the person played it on PC. Says Black Myth Wukong recommends the minimum processor is Intel Core i5 8400, AMD Ryzen 5 1600. The recommended processor, and the person who used it tested it on. They had an Intel Core i7 9700, and they were still having issues. So maybe the patch will come out, like you said, fix a lot of those issues for people that are playing on PC and make it a little bit more of an enjoyable experience there for them. So yeah, Black Myth Wukong, initial impressions.